Welcome to ecotopiaU. I'm Melissa McGinnis, your host, and I'm with my co-host Tom Wright, and we are here today to discuss a neo-agrarian worldview. How's that, tongue twister?
It's not a great tongue twister. Agrarianism is an old philosophy, and we're here to talk about a new philosophy called neo-agrarianism. The traditional agrarianism had sort of two roots to it. The first meaning was referred to a social philosophy which valued rural societies as superior to urban society and independent farmers as superior to the paid worker, to the industrial system, and sees farming as a way of life that can shape ideal social values. In other words, it was a response to the moral decay of industrialism. And then there's another root of agrarianism, which is just the social upheaval caused by to redistribute lands so that there's enough farmers to feed the people, and it's not a feudal system. So that's what you saw in China and in the 20th century, and in India earlier than that. And so those topics aren't what we're going to discuss here.
Okay, well, tell me what we're going to discuss then.
We're going to discuss neo-agrarianism. Probably the greatest personalities are Aldo Leopold and Wendell Berry in terms of how people think about who started talking about a more modern way to think about it. I think today we can even upgrade it even more to urban farming. In other words, that old ethic that urbanization itself was an evil, we can maybe learn how to live with urbanization and have green plants and food at the same time. That's neo-agrarianism.
So agrarianism needed to be redefined to really be relatively appropriate to what we're doing today, which is we do have urbanism.
We do have urbanism, we do have industrialism, we do have technosphere. So to the extent that we can learn from those domains and yet still cherish a tree, cherish a garden. When you see empty lots in a city, why aren't they planted? You know, why don't we have that ethic to see greenery there, unless we enjoy blank decay, which doesn't seem very aesthetic or very productive.
So let's go back just a little bit for the viewers that might not be familiar with agrarianism, which is really to make the farmer the most important person.
It's to elevate, I don't know, we could say most important, but to at least elevate the idea of farming and gardening as pertinent to life, even though we're modern, quote unquote, whatever.
But wouldn't that just be completely accurate that a farmer, I mean, we need food, so wouldn't that be completely accurate?
Yeah, you would think so. But obviously we've been losing farmers generationally. Every generation in America over the last century, we lost a significant number of farmers.
And this started when?
Oh, it's parallels the Industrial Revolution. When you think of it from a mechanical point of view, you go from horse-drawn plows to a machine. You don't need horses and so many men all of a sudden. I mean, that's one of the easy ways things. So you literally have substitution for animal power and human power and ingenuity. You have a machine take over, and at first it's obviously far more productive to use machinery. I think that displaced farmers. It made farming more a commodity. In some ways, it made it easier to be a good farmer because you could just plant a crop and show up every once in a while with your machines and you get the crop and sell it, and so it was less of a social value as it was an economic value. And I think agrarianism in general, and neo-agrarianism specifically, is to help drive the value of the farmer as a social entity as well as an economic entity. And there's some other connections, I think, to human growth and the appreciation of family and community above self, and the appreciation that there's some other thing going on here that's intergenerational, whether you call it God or Gaia. It's not so much pertinent about what your spiritual path is as much as you realize that you're just helping this in this place for this time.
It seems to combine several different philosophies into one. And what would those different philosophies be?
Well, you discussed it with me before. Go ahead. You understand this part of it as well as I do. So
I think it's interesting to really point out that neo-agrarianism is really tied to respecting the land and thus respecting a higher power that created the land for us to eat. I mean, we should be really grateful that we have food and we have profitable soil, if you will.
Yeah, and the soil, the farming methodologies around neo-agrarianism, you're going to hear words like regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, low-input agriculture. Again, it's perhaps not complete lack of herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides, but it's certainly very suspect to use any of those if you don't have to. So there's a precautionary principle that in order to intervene in nature, you don't want to add stuff that may be a problem, And so if you can show precaution and know that you can still grow food and build soil, why wouldn't you? I think one of the most distinct things that this is blending in modern society is just the human aspect of engagement with land. There's a famous gentleman called Wes Jackson who talks about the eyes to acre ratio, about regenerative agriculture and organic agriculture, that the caring changes the human's ideal about what they are in terms of land. It's them watching and protecting and caring, and at the same time, that means more farmers per acre when you think about it. Less machines and more farmers. Farmers, I do think, needs to take on a totally non-sexist point of view in this neo-agrarianism too. This is women and men farming equally.
Mm-hmm. So this is a definition or a couple bullet points that I found when I was researching neo-agrarianism. Beliefs that personal responsibility is required of all of the foundation for steward of self, of society, and of the world. Recognizes and serves a higher power. Respects faith and family above self, for it is through these that identity is born, civility is mastered, and joy is found. Cherishes community and the interplay among the members thereof. This sounds to me a little out there. How do we bring that maybe, a little bit more relatable to where we are in the world today?
That's a great question. I could answer it more that I see it happening because those values are in people who do this thing, the urban gardeners, the people who, there's this whole movement called SPIN, which stands for sub-acre plot intensive farming. And so, and that's happening in rural settings and in urban settings. You just get a sense that people know that there's something to growing food on a plot that's manageable by a few people, even if it's not a full-time job. That maybe instead of 40 hours a week, it's 12 hours a week amongst 4 people, and those type of. So I guess to answer your question, I'm observing these values more than I'm hearing people pontificate them. Does that make sense to say it that way? Mm-hmm.
And I think a way to maybe bring it to an individual would be to suggest someone or a family even plant one seed of something very small, whether it be a cherry tomato or a sunflower plant, and watch it grow, having to maintain just that seed. It requires water and sunlight and nurturing, and once it does potentially bloom, the aha moment of potentially not taking our food or things growing for granted.
Yes, that's very clear that that's part of this process. Whether you idealize it and refer to it as a spiritual path or not, that again is that's an individual perception.
Well, don't get me wrong, I completely adopted the philosophy, if you will. I believe in it wholeheartedly. I first learned about it when I worked on Prince Charles's film Harmony. That was the first place I really heard about understanding that there was something divine that created this. Therefore, we must respect it. And in many ways, we're similar. Our DNA is similar to these plants that are being grown, and we can't ignore that.
Yeah, in fact, Prince Charles wrote what I would consider a simple treatise about neo-agrarianism. Of course, he didn't frame it that way, but it's called The Future of Food. It's a short pamphlet-like book, very easy, very accessible for everybody to read, very well done. You can find it on Amazon. Yeah, he's a special guy.
So how necessary is it that we really examine this? I mean, can we continue at the rate of which we're going in terms of farming? Is this not just a nice idea, but something that's actually really necessary?
When you look at two things, you look at unemployment and you look at what people call happiness index, or in the case what I'm trying to articulate is people with all this materialness, even the people who aren't unemployed with all their materialness aren't that happy. And then you do the same sort of study with gardeners and small farmers, and you find they're very happy people. So there's the happiness and the unemployment, I would hope, would start to merge with more people desiring to be farmers or master gardeners, master composters. There's a whole ilk of gigs that come along with this genre. In fact, it's going to include technology and computers because we do want to understand carbon sequestration from the molecule point of view. When we really want to understand there's more carbon in the soil. We really want to understand there's more water being retained because there's more carbon in the soil. That quote-unquote drought resistance has a lot to do with building climate adaptive farming and gardening. But I do think unemployment is one of those things that it's not really hard to imagine that 150 years ago, I would guess close to 90% of the employed population had to do with farms or growing, some sort of servicing of farms. And so I think it's 3% of the population now.
Oh, wow.
So it's very small, and that includes distribution and processing too. I think is a very small percentage. Yeah, you would think that people would understand that unemployment is due to a large extent that people don't have productive things to do anymore because of machines. That machines have substituted, and fossil fuel is substituted for animal energy and human energy. And people, whether they want to say that they understand it intellectually or not, they probably understand it in a sense that, well, we could do something now. I could have a garden. Our director has a garden in front of his house. We know that, and so we know that people, and he lives in Long Beach, or near Long Beach, I guess. I shouldn't maybe. But so it's really possible to do these things. Now, I do think the missing link myself, this is sort of why I like to do these kind of shows, I do think we need platforms of education so that, 10, 11, 12-year-olds can start to learn how to garden, so that the school garden is kind of a normal thing, so that they don't lose the connection between soil and seeds and the food they eat. That whole system they need to understand, I think, earlier.
And the appreciation of the food, not take it for granted. Correct. It doesn't come in a box. It actually has to be grown.
And the diversity of the food, that there's more than one potato, not just russets. There's other potatoes in the world. In fact, I know there's over 1,000 varieties of potatoes still in the Andes. So, yeah, that's the whole genre, again, is to develop a perspective of humility and grace and appreciation towards the soil, the land as a whole. That includes fruit trees, it includes non-fruiting trees, includes all the living, the idea that insects can be good. I mean, I think just kids need to kind of learn that at an early age, so they look at a worm and they don't feel like squishing it necessarily, or they understand how a spider relates to the food web. And it's in that, I think, and we teach that early enough, junior high schools, that then the colleges would have to respond because they'd see demand increase. And then the other trick here, I do think, for neo-agrarianism to really pull itself up and move forward is pricing food correctly. And I do think Americans are sort of addicted to cheap food, and it is cheap. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that may create a problem in their health because they're eating a lot of processed cheap food.
Is there an example worldwide that prices food appropriately, and potentially are they leading? Is there any country that's leading this neo-agrarian?
Well, obviously, the simplest thing to respond is just to say, if you look at organic food and people think it's expensive, no, it's not. Organic food's true cost. That's real cost. That's what food should cost. That's the beginning of what food should cost. Now, having said that, obviously, if you're doing small-scale farming and there's more people doing small-scale farming, more people are actually growing portion of their diet themselves. So I've always kind of joked that way, is that you can use a rule of thumb that organic food costs about 30% more than conventional cheap food and processed food. That 30% difference, you can maybe garden or farm yourself. In other words, your total budget may not change if you're smart. The other way to say it too is if you eat less meat, especially industrial meat, you're going organic vegetables cost less than industrial meat. So if you change your diet up so it's whether it's more paleo or just less meat or go vegetarian or go completely vegan, anytime you do that, you help your pocketbook also. Because red meat in particular costs a lot of money to produce. Even organic meat costs a lot of money to produce.
But the neo-agrarian worldview is not a vegetarian.
No, neo-agrarian is not. No, it's about specifically, it's about the respect for the land and the respect for the ideal as the farmer as social servant. It's elevating the farmer in our eyes to the pertinence of the ongoing social network, the ongoing fabric of society.
Our country was developed with that in mind.
Correct.
Jefferson and
it's often called the Jeffersonian philosophy. Yeah, he was definitely an agrarian, not a neo-agrarian. And the reason I didn't bring him up is because there's a lot of contradictions with Thomas Jefferson. Obviously, he owned slaves. The reason he was able to farm so good was because he had slaves, and so you start to step into that.
But if the farmer is the most esteemed person in the planet, so.
At the same time, it would have been nice if it could have been pulled off a different way. It'd been easier to tell Thomas Jefferson's story, I think.
And with the growing of our population, is it a reality that we're going to use less mechanical tools to farm and go back to labor?
Another great question. There's an implication when you do anything smaller scale that a big tractor if you're doing 2 acres, maybe a small tractor, but then again, you'd probably want to have it done more in a cooperative way where the small tractor was shared by 20 different 2-acre farmers. So, so the machines per acre, I just did the math, simple math, 40 acres for one machine is not much. There's people that are farming thousands of acres with a couple of machines nowadays. So that type of industrial farming, you would hope it'd start to collapse on its own problems. Monoculture, there's problems in society with too much herbicides, insecticide, fungicide in the water system. So you'd think that the industrial agricultural system in some ways is going to feed back towards less mechanical inputs. At the same time, it's hard to believe we'll ever get off that sort of system. I think machines are here to stay, and I think what we've got to do is become smarter with how we use machines and understand carbon as a cycle rather than just I'm going to use my gas today and not care where the hell it goes, because obviously it's causing issues. So it's an awareness that we're going to have that has a neo-agrarianism in the forefront. Because it's job creating, because it's respectful of the land, and because, quite frankly, from an economic point of view, the driving force of all societies benefits from better food, I think. And so the machines, less intensity, more labor, maybe, but we're certainly going to have more intelligence, I think, through computers and stuff. I think that's going to change. There's sensors now. I've been visiting an organic greenhouse in Holland, in northern Germany, and each greenhouse was a couple acres in size, and they had drip systems, and
so that sounds like maybe that's a good hybrid answer.
Yeah,
because it's people are still farming those contained agriculture
Yeah.
environments, but they're also being maintained with like computer science.
Yes, yeah. No, the information feedback loops are really important to understand how a plant's doing. And there's certain plants, of course, humans like them for certain qualities, either color or sweetness, or whatever that quality is. And yeah, we have sensors now that can tell us that the plant's moving along that path, which makes it, of course, more marketable, and then of course, it keeps the price up, keeps sales going.
I'd like to just go back to this point just for a minute, just to clarify for our viewers, if anybody doesn't really understand, why is our food so cheap?
Wow. It'd be great to have time to just research that topic itself. I can give you sort of an off-the-cuff type of answer. There are subsidies involved with agriculture, direct subsidies for farmers, direct subsidies for producers. So in other words, there's the actual cost of farming doesn't show up in the price because it's been subsidized. There's actually checks coming from the government. That's true. We could look up that statistic, how much money is actually cut by the USDA, but there are checks. I know statistically that the greatest amount of money goes to the largest farmers, which again is by definition they tend to be very much industrial farmers. I know organic farmers have complained about the ratio in Washington. I know that there's always been that debate.
So there's less subsidies going to.
Well, but that 30% differential can get skewed on purpose. It makes organic cheaper than it should be, makes industrial cheaper than it should be. If organic farming or organic-like farming, because you don't have to be certified organic to do this right thing, this neo-agrarian.
Correct.
You just have to be doing the right thing. You just have to be respecting the land, respecting nature, respecting family, respecting animals and all beings. That itself isn't a certification process.
You don't have to be a farmer to be a neo-agrarian.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You can be a gardener. You can be a support system to somebody who does it too. That's obviously true too.
So we'll definitely cover the price of food on another show.
Yeah.
But for the most part, there's subsidies.
I was just saying, there's subsidies that are actual, and then there's ecological subsidies. Again, cutting short biodiversity. Monocultures, but Vandana Shiva is an Indian eco-philosopher and brilliant woman. And I've listened to her speak, and she often jokes because people in the industrial ag will brag that GMOs outproduce organic agriculture, and the truth of the matter, it doesn't. What they're saying is that because they grow monoculture, they're producing more corn per acre by their own data, but they're not creating more plant life or biomass per acre, because organic's a different methodology. It isn't a monoculture; it's a diverse planting strategy on purpose, so that you don't have to intervene in nature so much with herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides. So these they're called externalities. That's a fancy term. So you have cheap food because the externalities, the future cost, is not in there, and the healthcare costs are not embedded in the food costs. The happiness is not embedded in there either. So you have a lot of these issues they're not direct monetary subsidies, but they're certain social subsidies, and certainly somebody's going to pay for them down the pike.
There's mostly probably you with healthcare.
I would say healthcare, but let me give you a specific externality that I think a lot of people do know about, which is the dead zone at the end of the Mississippi River. And again, this is something the listeners can look up themselves. And the history of the dead zone, it's totally correlated to agricultural runoff. And then, of course, that means you lose marine productivity in that dead zone. So it connects to health, but it connects to health of a lot of other beings too, which are part of the food chain, which, again, it's a long-term oops for us, And the way to fix it from the industrial side is to throw more gadgetry and throw more technology and throw more energy at everything. And I'm sorry, but I don't see it working. And I think that's why we're talking about this, because I do think a lot of other people don't see it working.
So to be a neo-agrarian, you don't need to be a farmer. And it's a way to potentially get your joy back, because it's been proven spending more time in nature actually does fill you with joy.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I was trying to remember this essay. There's an essay that somebody wrote about walking under large trees. That if you can walk under large trees for a mile or so, how it changes your whole mood.
That's fascinating.
Just because it's a canopy, and there's something about being under a tree. Walnut orchard or redwood grove or pine forest, whichever you can be near. It just seems like we innately understand that it's good for us to be around large plants.
Our bodies are composed of elements that relate to being under a canopy.
Yeah, when you think about what we really are as far as how we evolved, obviously there was plant life long before there's animal life, and etc. And so yeah, we are what we eat. That's overstated, but of course you are. I mean, what else would you be?
So I want to make sure we have some time to go to this part of our segment here on ecotopiaU, which is activate. So one, we like to educate, but secondly, and most importantly, really, we'd like to activate people into really taking some of these ideas and putting them into motion in their own lives. Neo-agrarianism isn't just a great idea, it's actually a necessity, and it's different components for a happy, healthy, joyful life. We mentioned one, spending more time in nature. I would also suggest, and go back to, we did touch on this a little bit, plant something. You don't need to have a full garden. You could have a window box, or even just house plants. I mean, taking care of house plants require water and sunlight and hope and a prayer.
And if you live in a condo or apartment or some situation where you don't have, quote unquote, a garden or yard, then again, this is something anybody can look up. And there's in almost all urban, suburban linked communities, because remember, for the most part in America, almost all the urban communities exist because there was good farmland near them. Because especially if you're talking about any city that's 1930 or earlier, you're going to find there's a connection to agricultural land. There's going to be connection to community gardens. There's going to be like this spin farming that was came out of suburban Philadelphia, and so urban agriculture, in that sense, I think is available to a lot of people. But you have to learn. It's a joining thing. You got to.
So you've got to look for it.
You got to look for it and decide who your friends are.
Well, I know in urban areas there's a lot of farmers markets. So sometimes they're coming to you actually. Yeah. So support some farmers markets. I'd say look around. Look at all these different unique vegetables that you haven't maybe tried. Ask some questions from the farmers about these vegetables. Get to know different things that grow in your area.
And then obviously one of the great support systems to neo-agrarianism is going to be good cooks and chefs. Because if you can turn that, you can turn, a squash blossom into something special, then people really appreciate it.
Hit you where it matters on your taste buds.
On your taste buds,
well, yeah. It sounds like maybe we should turn this over to the chefs to lead this movement.
Well, you can look, if you just Google Sustainable Chefs Association, or there's something in that name vein, you'll see that there's a lot of chefs who understand that they may not call it neo-agrarian. They may call it small-scale local agriculture, which it tends to be true too. By the way, it doesn't have to be small-scale. I mentioned the concept of 22-acre plot owners or users using one set of machines for themselves, for instance. But you could have 40 to 100 acres, and you'd still be small relative to the modern society's farms. And now you and I, if we came up to a 100-acre farm, we'd go, oh my goodness. But it's still relatively small, and I know from my background in the seed business that some of the best farmers farmed in that scale, in that 40 to 100 acre scale, because it was noticeable. They could pay attention to all the details on their farm.
Well, I definitely think that this topic is worthy of a follow-up conversation. If you'd like to visit our website at ecotopiaU.tv and just join the conversation, email us. You'll see email there to be able to reach us. Your questions, we'll be sure to cover them on our next round 2 of this really important topic. Also, if you have any suggestions for us in regards to this topic, please also let us know so we can cover that as well. This is very important. It's not just a nice, warm, feel-good topic, but very, very necessary. So I thank you very much for discussing this with us today, Tom, and thank you all for watching.